The laughter was the worst part. Not the shove, not the fall, not the cold linoleum floor rushing up to meet a man who had once parachuted into enemy territory in complete darkness, who had held the line when everything around him was falling apart, who had given 30 years of his life to a country that would never fully understand what that cost him. No, the worst part was the laughter, and the silence of everyone who heard it and did nothing. Everyone, except one. It was a Tuesday morning in late November, the kind of morning that arrives gray and heavy, like the sky itself is tired. The town of Millhaven, Tennessee, sat wrapped in the first real cold of the season. Frost clung to truck windshields, smoke rose from chimneys in thin, quiet threads. Riley's Diner had been on the corner of 4th and Maple for 41 years. The booths were cracked vinyl. The coffee was strong and bitter and came in thick ceramic mugs that had survived more Tuesday mornings than anyone could count. The kind of place where nothing extraordinary was supposed to happen. Sarah Mitchell pushed through the front door at 7:14 in the morning. She had been awake for 31 hours. She was 34 years old, a former Army medic, now an ICU nurse at Graymont Memorial, and she had spent the last 3 hours of her shift holding the hand of a 72-year-old man named Harold, who died just before sunrise while his daughter was still 40 minutes away on the highway. She had told him he wasn't alone. She meant it. Now she sat in the third booth from the door, still in her scrubs, her dark hair pulled back, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she ordered out of habit rather than desire. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't even really present. She was somewhere between Harold's last breath and the drive home she hadn't made yet. The diner was quiet. A few regulars, the soft sound of a griddle, country radio low on the speakers. Then the door opened again. He came in slowly, not because he was unsure, but because Jack Thompson moved through the world the way a man moves when his body has paid a price his face will never fully show. He was 50 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from discipline. A slight limp in his right leg, a jaw that hadn't fully unclenched in years. He was a retired U.S. Navy SEAL, 3 decades of service, 2 wars, more operations than any file ever completely captured, and now a quiet life in Millhaven, where most people knew his face, but very few knew his name. Rex walked beside him, a German shepherd, lean and alert, his dark eyes scanning the room with the quiet authority of a dog who had once worked in places most people only see in news reports. He wore his service vest. His movements were smooth, controlled, synchronized with Jack's the way only years of partnership can create. Jack chose the corner booth. He always chose the corner booth. Old habits. You sit where you can see the door. You sit where nothing can come from behind you. Rex settled beneath the table, his chin resting on his front paws, his eyes still moving slowly across the room. The waitress brought Jack coffee without being asked. She'd seen him enough times to know. He nodded once, that was all. For a few minutes, it was quiet. Sarah noticed him the way you notice someone who carries weight without asking for help. She recognized something in his posture, the discipline, the distance, the way he was present and somewhere else at the same time. She'd seen it in veterans before. She'd seen it in herself sometimes, in the mirror after bad shifts. She almost said something. She didn't. Not yet. Tyler Hale and Marcus Penn came in at 7:31. They were 19. They were loud in the particular way of young men who have never once been told that the world doesn't exist for their entertainment. Tyler's father, Victor Hale, owned half the commercial property in Millhaven and a quarter of its goodwill, which meant Tyler had grown up understanding, on some cellular level, that consequences were negotiable. They didn't come for breakfast. They came the way bored, entitled boys sometimes come into quiet places, just looking, for something, for someone. Their eyes found Jack and Rex almost immediately. It started small. It always starts small. "Hey, nice dog," Tyler called across the diner, his voice carrying that particular laziness of someone who knows they won't be challenged. "What's he for? You blind or something?" Jack didn't look up. He'd been trained to endure worse than this. He sipped his coffee. Rex's ears moved slightly, just slightly. Marcus leaned over to Tyler and said something low. They both laughed. They moved closer. "Serious question, man," Tyler said, stopping near Jack's booth. "Is he like your emotional support animal? You got PTSD or something?" The word landed in the diner like something dropped from a height. A woman near the window looked down at her plate. The cook slowed behind the counter. Sarah's hands tightened around her mug. Jack still didn't respond. His jaw tightened. One hand moved almost imperceptibly to Rex's head beneath the table. Rex pressed upward into that hand. "Steady. I'm here." "He's not going to answer. I don't think he can." More laughter. Then Jack stood. He stood slowly, with the careful dignity of a man managing real pain, in his leg, in his back, in places that don't appear on any medical chart. He was leaving. He had decided, in the way that men who have survived everything decide things, quietly, without drama, that this was not worth it, that he would simply go. Tyler stepped into his path. "Sit down, Cripple." The words hit the room like a physical thing. Sarah looked up. Something shifted in her face, not anger yet, something older than anger, something closer to recognition. She had spent her adult life in service, first in uniform, then in hospital corridors, and she knew, in the way that people who have cared for broken bodies always know, exactly what it costs a man like Jack Thompson to stand in this room right now. She knew what it cost him to stay quiet. She knew what it cost him to keep walking. Jack tried to move around Tyler. Tyler shoved him. It wasn't hard. It didn't need to be. A man with a compromised leg, caught off balance, that's all it takes. Jack went down. The sound of it, a man that size, that dignity, hitting that floor, was something no one in Riley's diner would forget for the rest of their lives. And then Rex was there. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply moved, faster than anyone registered, and stood over Jack, covering him, his body low, his eyes up, his entire being saying the only thing that mattered in that moment. Not him, not while I'm here. The boys stepped back, just slightly. The diner was completely silent, and Sarah Mitchell stood up. She didn't rush, she didn't shout. She walked across that diner the way she walked into trauma rooms, with absolute quiet certainty. She knelt beside Jack first. "You're okay," she said, her voice low and even. "I've got you. Don't rush." Rex looked at her, a long, searching look. Then, slowly, he shifted, just enough to let her closer. She checked Jack's head, his wrist, his eyes. Medic's hands, automatic, careful, practiced. "Can you stand?" she asked. "I'm fine," Jack said. The words came out rough and quiet, the voice of a man who had said, "I'm fine," so many times it had become its own kind of wound. "I know you are," Sarah said. "Let me help anyway." She helped him to his feet. Then she turned. Tyler was smiling, the kind of smile that expects no consequence. "You need to leave," Sarah said. "Tut, lady, we didn't do anything. I watched everything you did." Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. "Leave, now." Tyler stepped toward her, the smile still on his face, and then he grabbed her wrist. It lasted less than a second. Sarah's training, Army combatives, 12 years of muscle memory, moved before her mind did. She broke his grip, controlled his arm, took him to the floor. Clean, precise, no rage, no excess, just enough. Marcus moved. She redirected him the same way. 8 seconds. 2 boys on the floor of a diner. Rex watching from beside Jack, still and silent. Not because he couldn't act, because he didn't need to. The fallout came fast. Someone had recorded it. Not the shove, not the words, not the moment Jack hit the floor. Just Sarah. Just those 8 seconds. Within 48 hours, she was suspended pending investigation. Within a week, she was charged with assault. The local news used words like volatile and military trained. Victor Hale's lawyers were expensive and fast. Sarah sat in her apartment and stared at the wall. Jack disappeared. He stopped coming to Riley's. He stopped coming anywhere. He had spent years learning to be invisible, and now the world was loud again, and loud had never been safe. But Margaret Chen had been sitting at the window table. 73 years old, retired school teacher with an old smartphone she barely knew how to use, but she had pressed record before Tyler ever opened his mouth. She had everything. The words, the shove, Jack falling, Rex covering him, all of it. She walked it into the county sheriff's office herself. "I'm too old," she said quietly to the deputy at the desk, "to stay quiet about something like this." The courtroom was standing room only. It shouldn't have been a complicated case, but Victor Hale's money made it complicated. The prosecution painted Sarah as unstable, reactive, a woman whose military background made her dangerous. They described Rex as a threat. They questioned Jack's account. Then the defense played Margaret's video. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of a courtroom, something deeper, something that happens when truth enters a space that has been full of noise. Jack testified. He walked to the stand slowly. Rex waited outside the courtroom doors, and somehow everyone in that room knew it. Somehow Jack knew it too, that Rex was just on the other side of that wall, still there, still waiting. Jack spoke quietly. He didn't perform. He didn't ask for sympathy. He simply told the truth, word by careful word, the way a man speaks when speaking has always cost him something. When he finished, the courtroom was very still. The verdict came back the same afternoon. Not guilty. Victory didn't feel the way victory is supposed to feel. Sarah sat in her car in the parking lot afterward and cried, not from relief, but from exhaustion, from the particular weight of having done something right and paid for it anyway. Jack found her there. He knocked on the passenger window. She unlocked the door. He sat down. Rex put his head over the seat from the back, resting his chin near Sarah's shoulder. They sat there for a long time without speaking. Finally, Jack said, "You didn't have to do that." Sarah shook her head. "Yeah," she said quietly, "I did." The community came slowly, the way real communities do. Not all at once, not dramatically. Veterans started showing up. Families, former patients of Sarah's who had heard what happened. Letters came. Local businesses put signs in their windows. Riley's diner closed. The owner, ashamed of what had happened inside his walls, sold it. A group of Mill Haven residents bought the space. They renamed it Victory Diner. Not for winning a court case, for the harder kind of victory. The kind that happens when ordinary people decide that cruelty will not be the last word. Sarah went back to nursing, and then, slowly, unexpectedly, she began speaking, at hospitals, at veterans centers, at nursing schools, about trauma, about standing up, about what it costs and why it matters anyway. 1 year after that Tuesday morning in November, she stood before an auditorium of several hundred people. Jack was in the audience, third row, Rex beside him, calm and still. Sarah spoke about fear, about exhaustion, about the moment in that diner when she stood up, not because she was brave, but because something in her simply could not stay seated. Afterward, a young nurse found her near the exit. "I almost quit last month," the young woman said. Her eyes were full. "Your story is the reason I didn't." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. "Then it was worth it," she said. "All of it." They still meet on Thursday mornings, Sarah and Jack, Victory Diner, corner booth, coffee, quiet, sometimes words, mostly not. Rex lies beneath the table, his gray muzzle resting on his paws, his eyes half closed. They are not heroes. They never called themselves that. They are just two people who showed up when showing up was hard, and a dog who never once stopped showing up for the man who needed him most. Outside, Millhaven moves through its mornings, unhurried, ordinary, alive. And in the corner booth of a diner named for a different kind of victory, there is peace. Sometimes that is everything. Because real courage was never about medals or headlines. It was about a woman who stood up when everyone else looked away. It was about a man who kept his dignity on the floor of a diner. It was about a dog who covered his human with his own body and said, "Not today." If you believe that loyalty still matters, that kindness is still the bravest thing a person can do, that the quiet heroes among us deserve to be seen, then you belong here. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales. Every story is a reminder that courage still walks among us, quietly, without applause, just like Jack, just like Rex. This story carries lessons that reach far beyond its narrative. It speaks honestly about the invisible wounds carried by veterans, the hypervigilance, the isolation, the quiet suffering of men and women who gave everything and returned to a world that didn't always know how to receive them. Jack's story is not fictional. Across America, thousands of veterans navigate daily life with physical limitations, PTSD, and a deep, trained instinct to endure in silence. This story asks its viewers to see them. It demonstrates the profound therapeutic bond between service dogs and their handlers. Rex is not a prop, he is a lifeline, and the research supports this. Studies consistently show that trained canine companions reduce anxiety, interrupt trauma responses, and provide veterans with a form of unconditional presence that human relationships sometimes cannot replicate. It illustrates the moral cost of standing up, that doing the right thing is rarely clean or consequence-free. Sarah loses her job, her reputation, and her sense of safety before justice arrives. This is honest, and it teaches viewers, especially young ones, that courage is not defined by the absence of cost, but by the willingness to pay it. It shows that ordinary people, like Margaret Chen, a 73-year-old woman with a smartphone, can be the turning point between injustice and truth. And finally, it reminds us that community is not built by grand gestures. It is built by small, consistent choices to show up, to speak, to stay. That is the education this story offers, and it is one this world very much still needs.